What have we here?
Does it have a name, Peter?
Did we name it yet?
Hi, I'm Heinbach and it's good to have you back. Peter Blasser of Ciat-Lonbarde and Jan St.Werner of Mouse on Mars came by to my studio to show me their new collaboration. This little instrument. The underlying idea of this instrument is an orchestra in a millisecond. And I found our chat about it so fascinating that I left it in almost unedited, except for brevity where necessary. We touched upon many subjects relating to music, art, how we perceive sound, and how instruments are built. It gets extremely nerdy, but also extremely beautiful. And I guess that is why you're here. I've dotted some sound examples of this instrument throughout this video, and if you're my Patreon, there's a sample pack there waiting for you, as well as the opening track we're listening to now. And now, enjoy the show.
Well, it was going to be the Janovitz clicker.
But does it have anything to do with Janovitz bridge?
Well, it's Jan. So then it became Janovitz clicker.
Because you are Jan.
Yeah.
Yes, and also I'm Jan, and I might perform it under Janovitz brücke because you have this beautiful reflection under bridges. Like this is predetermined to be used under bridges.
Okay.
So it could be a Janovitz device. Yes.
Janovitz device?
I call it the click synth. That's how we refer to it when we internally talk about it. But
Okay, so there's no official name yet.
Well, there was in the... I had two words. It has a Ringler in it too.
Ringler?
Yeah, I have Clicker 3900 because it uses the LM 3900, which is a whole new branch of my work. And it says there's a Ringler in it too, which is important to its operation. Ringler means it's ring mods. So that has to do with a lot of your videos, actually, that you were talking about ring mods in the DDR. The ring mod is actually coming up a lot in my work. It's a contrast to adding signals together is multiplying signals together. And that's just a basic law of physics and nature, actually. Modulation versus superposition. Well, back up. This is based off of the work of Rob Hordijks, who created the Benjamin, and then we made the Peterlin, and that has what's called a Rungler in it. And that is, a Rungler is a data misinterpretation circuit, but it's with digital chips. And so for this, I wanted to create a data misinterpretation circuit for the modulations, but have it be completely analog. And that is simply just a ring mod. But I can make really good ring mods with the LM3900. This chip, it's not a new chip, it's an old chip. It's what they used to use in the surges, in the very first surges. And they stopped using them, stopped putting those in serious synth designs in the 70s.
Why?
Because it's not as easy. It's simply, they came out with, quote, better chips.
Okay.
And transconductance amplifiers, and synth making became this fancy thing. But actually, the original chip, I would argue, is completely valid. And it has the widest frequency range, and I learned some new things about it, how to drive it with exponential control and transistor pairs, and it's super valid. And so my vision going forward at the moment, it's like a 4 to 10 year vision, is to make either remake some of my old synthesizers or make new ones using this chip as if I was Serge in the 70s and I didn't have any new chips.
Okay.
As if I just started using this chip and I continued the work with that chip, and it's really it's a totally different kind of input on the amplifier, actually.
You still get those chips?
Yes, the thing is, yes, so there's actually a rush right now because I have to lobby for its usage so that they don't stop making it. But I think if they stop making it, actually, it would be pretty easy to have a pirated version made because it's pure silicon. So it's not like a high-tech chip. It's just a basic chip. It's a 4-channel op-amp. Norton op-amp is different from the other ones. It means it has raw inputs, and that's, for a circuit designer, is really cool. And it enables actually really high-frequency stuff.
And high frequency stuff is of course important when you're working with ring modulation, where everything gets thrown up into the air and you get so much content sound up there,
Yes.
and that all it comes back down.
Yes. The Ringlers are made with, it's a pure, there's no decoupling capacitors. It's just a pure current, a little bit of voltage, but mostly a current through system. And when you use current systems based on current, on flow, then there's no upper limit to your frequency. Well, there always is an upper limit to your frequencies, but yeah, that's really inspiring to know that all my frequencies can go through when I want them to. Yeah. And the ring mods are actually, I can make a ring mod with one section of the Norton amplifier. So that's 1 out of 4. And then I can make an oscillator, any kind of oscillator, with 2 sections. So when Jan came to me with this proposal, I started lining up how I would break down these amplifiers. I'd put an oscillator here and a swoop here. A swoop is basically an oscillator, but it stops. It's just triggered and it stops. And that's how you create those envelopes.
Oh, so basically like on the test equipment where you're, if at this range you want the swoop. Okay, and that's also a module that you have, right? It's called, don't you have a module called swoop? A Euro module?
Yeah. It would be equivalent to the Surge DUSG.
GSG.
The swoop slope, universal slope generator.
Yes.
But basically, it's really is just an oscillator, but restrict with a saturated lower boundary so that when it comes back down to that, it doesn't keep on oscillating. It just comes back down and waits for you to put the extra energy to bring it back up again and do its thing. And it can have any shape. It can be the long decay, the tight rice grain, or the long attack. So those are how these knobs are laid out on this instrument, is to have a spectrum between those 3 envelopes. So the long attack would be, well, let's give some more normal frequencies. So there's a long attack, and if I pull the knob entirely the other way, I'm going to have a long decay. Of course, it's being right. So there's our long decay, and then in the middle, I have a tight. Just a completely tight envelope. So it's actually, we have no envelopes, although we can go into musical mode. We have no envelopes like that, like long. But that's because the purpose of this instrument is to focus on creating these grains. So because we're trying to excite acoustic spaces with it.
What was the proposal that you came to Peter with, or?
I came through Darren Weiner, particularly character, has good style and fashion. He's eloquent. He brings people together, and he's a very generous person. When we did these sessions with Lee Scratch Perry in our studio in Patch Point's just basically across the street from where our old studio was, he just came and brought stuff from the workshop so we could try it and see how it works.
The important thing that you said was he was connecting people, and he saw that you had a need that would be very conducive to what I can deliver. So.
I said, Darren, I need a device that's very simple to use, that I can attach to a speaker that's also custom built, that I'm working on with my friend and colleague Michael Agstaller, which is a kind of a wavefield synthesis-based idea of creating very distinct sound beams that communicate with an environment quite strongly, so they really trigger spatial responses from wherever you are, and then depending on the synthesis you're using to feed the speaker, you could actually really trigger either more like echoey sounds or resonances, or very also artifacts by kind of sending things into the space and then actually waiting for the response to come, and there you would have modulation as well, depending on the frequency. That's what I'm doing right now for an installation in Venice, where actually I had the idea that maybe I could add either a performative live component to this installation, or maybe use some of the synthesis that I had in mind that I wanted but didn't know if it existed even. So for Venice, I'm using purely software-based sounds. One patch is by Marcin Pietruszewski. It's called the New Pulsar Generator, and the other is by Christopher Howarth, and forgot the name of his patch, but it's mostly to create autoacoustic emissions, DPOAs, like distortion product autoacoustic emissions, like phenomena that the inner ear is producing when it's being actually oversaturated by certain frequencies. And that kind of performance or play or interaction between what's inside your brain, what's happening in this whole like region of the ear, which is a space in its own right, the whatever vast outside space, and then the instrument you're using and the amplification system you're using. This is what really interests me. And I'm also obviously very much into electronic sound production, because there's a very simple thing that I love instruments and all the things that the world of acoustics is providing us with. But when you work with synthetic sound production and the sound appears through a speaker membrane, it appears for the first time, that's a very magic moment, because that is like when kind of a sound comes out and hits the air for the first time, and it's not through an instrument, which is basically the same principle, but instruments are so complex that sometimes you don't know what to look at, so you kind of take a bit of a distance and you enjoy the sound of the instrument, and the sound is being called what the instrument is being called. But there's so much happening around an instrument. Like there are many sounds which merge or mingle and fuse and create the sound of a violin, or even the sound of a drum. You have the transcends, you have very short, quick, like triggered, let's say, peaks of an oscillator that come up, but then you have like resonances and you have hums and you have like the reflections. So I asked Darren, hey, I just need a synth that gives a super short trigger, like something that just gives me a click, basically.
Okay. Yeah, you want the click that would be lost in the piano. You want just that to arise from the speaker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wanted like that moment when a string is being activated.
Yeah.
And maybe
just the chaotic phase, basically, like
not
the steady, not the steady part, when it starts to like resonate periodically.
Maybe I wouldn't even want the sound of the string itself,
because that's the room. Yeah.
Okay, so you're basically sending like a noise blast,
right?
Like you would Kepler strong, for example.
Kind of like this. It would be like the signal to measure, let's say, a signal chain. Like the first trigger, I'm using a patch like very intensely, which is a reactor-based patch, and it's based on feedbacks. And so what you need is you just need a super short, like a sample, basically, of a sound, like the 44,000th slice of a sound to trigger the chain of feedbacks. And Darren was like, that's difficult, and I think you might want to talk to Peter. And I knew Peter's instruments, or some of them, and used some of them, but I never thought of them being like trigger or percussion based, or like that I didn't think of. And then Dan was like, let's get Peter on the phone. And it was just one phone call. I don't know if it was very long. I think I tried to explain what I wanted, which was I want a sound that triggers actually my speaker or triggers a spatial response. It's basically an impulse generator.
Yes.
And ideally I could modulate it a little bit, and what should be within that impulse is the possibility that you unfold the spectra that might be densely compressed within a very small signal.
I see.
But then you kind of like open it up and then you sparse out the distance between the different spectra or like partials.
Yeah.
And I was just like fantasizing, and Peter was like, your description is crystal clear. I know exactly what to do. And I think that's probably all he said during that phone call. And
that's good.
I was still wanting to chit chat, but I think Peter had already left the room, and I was only talking to Darren.
Yeah,
He was still there.
Well, you also said just, an orchestra and a microsecond. That's actually always very inspiring to my branch of synthesizer making. I mean, synthesizer makers are usually really busy making long forms and like lush sounds that unfold over a long time. But really, I mean, it's just a matter of scale. You can bring that into the tiny scale because it's electronic. And to say that and have that need, which no musicians ever need that, because they are interested in their long, lush soundscapes. Yeah. But it's great for a synthesizer maker because, I'd like to work on those tiny things and see how my performance can get in those tiny spaces. But you also listed precedents for this, which are... The one you were talking about was the military clicker, but we should
What's the military clicker?
The beach landing we're doing at night or something?
Allies in the Normandy at night. That was like one of the ideas to provide them with these little metal, in Germany we call them, I think, Knackfrosch or Knallfrosch, so it's like a little metal tongue, and you click it, and then it has a little resonant body to it. Like usually it's square shape, but for kids they make them as frogs, and then you just like bend that little metal tongue, and it does like a... And so with these clickers, which had, even though the resonant body is very small, it would still produce resonances. So there is already a stack of partials. So when you use that clicker at night, being a parachuter, it's a horrible situation. I don't want to like romanticize at all about anything that's connected to like warfare and this form of aggression or defense, but the phenomenon that you would use such a device, and then at night, because it has resonances, you find orientation not only by this one reflection that you would get because you had like an ideal click for an ideal impulse response, but you have spectra. So these spectra already reflect differently from obstacles or objects that are a little closer or a little further. So you get a sense of size of space.
It's echolocation, basically.
It is echolocation, but it's not one click that is basically neutral. So you would have like an echo that is really only connecting to this one click. You get a few responses already, and because they're tonal or spectral, you could say like orchestra in a microsecond or something. You get a bit of you get dimension. You open up the zoom basically.
And in the military, these are used for communications. Did I get that right? So you would know, and also distance measuring, so you could orientate where are my bodies, basically.
Exactly, where are my bodies and where am I? So is this like a mountainside? Is this dry area? Is this like a forest maybe, or just a vast field? And like our hearing is so trained to do that, and it's one of the most unconscious things that we intuitively work with is really orientation through these tiny reflections. And what was important for me is like the ideal impulse response measurement, or not ideal, but what's used mostly is like a balloon popping.
Yeah.
And it just really does this. It's kind of like a white noise type of impulse. But when you have, that's another thing that like's happening right now in Venice.
You're sending out these tiny pulses at different pitches, which will excite the spaces in different spaces.
Yes.
Well, there's the orchestra and the microsecond. So it's within that one pulse, there's a lot of different things. And then the spectral smear would be, if it's, imagine it shooting at diagonal along a colonnade. I don't want to say shooting, but transmitting it along a colonnade, and it breaks up all that orchestra that was, it's like magic. It was this tiny little packet, this tiny spell, and it has this vast effect over the landscape.
It's as if you would open up that orchestra in a nutshell. Because you open it up not just because it's getting wider, because on its journey it hits surface, and it's like it's maybe the core miracle about sound, which we tend to forget when we use a lot of electronic tools. The space is actually what really makes things sound the way they sound. And with this technique, you understand that space isn't just a horizontal, like a width or something. It opens up that way, like a cinemascopic idea of reality. It also goes into depth. So the sound travels, it kind of hits you on the way, then it hits your tape echo, and then it goes hits somewhere in the kitchen, and then it's in the garden, and from the garden, you get a very distant response. It's still that journey that's going on there. And you can actually learn to listen within this time frame. I mean, all I've been doing my whole life was time stretching stuff.
Okay.
Extending it, shrinking it. I mean, it's a big part of what I'm doing. And what you learn is you time stretch in real life, like the way we listen to stuff. We time stretch all the time. We get information, we open it up.
It's true.
In retrospect. But we are also
in our brains too.
Yes, in our brains.
Processing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's what I also liked, and what I thought was really beautiful about Peter's response, because he got it because it was in his brain. He laid it out in his brain. He didn't even have to hear it. Even through the phone, I got he had a perspective on that. I don't want to say a vision, but what is a vision in sound? I don't know what the word for that is. This is how limited our language is. This is why we have to do these things, because we can't
Is there
write
vision
them.
in sound in German? How do you say? Gehör.
Eine Vision. I mean, I don't know. It's weird because.
I mean, there's always the sense of Klangfarbe. That's a very German word where you have sound directly related to color.
No, I'm thinking more of a sound projection. You imagine a sound.
Okay.
Well, there is the I'm not going to say, I'll just say the problem with color in this context is that even though you said it had the military clicker had a resonant body, and by the way, you said also something, I think, is this true? The military clicker had two tones.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
Ah.
Yes.
and two, you might call them resonances, but the important thing to know here is that there's a classic synthesizer lush idea of resonance is absent in this instrument, because we don't want just pinging resonators like boo. We don't want just a single resonance to transmit, but we want a complicated multi-resonance.
Okay.
And we should actually not even say resonance. When we say color, we might want to say, like snow or ash or dust.
No.
Like texture. We might want to say texture. Because the room
Just
is the
stretching
thing.
a texture, basically.
The room is the thing that puts the color, that takes texture and shifts it. Like when you see the moon landing it would be so lo-fi that it would be three colors, but if you moved fast enough, you would see a rainbow, and that's what I see. For
Yeah, that's a good point. And spatial depth, because if we formalize whatever, a thought, or let's say a circuit, or like how synthesis works, we tend to think linearly, this, then this, then this. I mean, that's how algorithmic thinking or rational logic thinking works. But it's really it's just ignoring the fact that things also work in space. It's a stacking of events.
Yes.
And the stacking, sometimes it's covering, it's over. Like if you think in formalized linear logic, then okay, you can't see something because there's overlay. But if you actually imagine to go into space like that, you would stack, you would unveil, unwrap, unfold the stacking of resonance.
Basically follow the sound at the same speed that it's going through the room.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
if you could project yourself at the same tempo of the sound.
Yes, I have that weird dream of like a 10-year-old, and it just stuck to my mind. I'd like to have a microphone that follows along a sound wave. So if you send a sound wave, you would have a device that just goes with it and just finds what happens with, like in interaction with an environment, what happens to that sound wave.
Yeah.
And then you can, that would be a dream,
yeah.
you know. I'd love to be able to.
Yeah, it would be like an arrow.
Yeah,
like an arrow.
Imagine an arrow or whatever, and then as it's passing objects in the room, there would be an eddy there.
Yes.
And then an eddy here.
Yeah, exactly.
An eddy like a whirlpool. And those are the colors coming in.
Yes.
The eddies.
Yeah, exactly. And but since we take this stack as one personality or one character or sound, like that's what we actually define as a sound color. We think that is the quality of that sound. That's that persona. It's its persona, but it's basically the dialogue with an environment. So next step would be like, also a space has qualities that are sound. You just only hear it when a sound hits a space.
Yeah, you excite the space, exactly.
When it excites a space. But a space has many idiosyncrasies and and many interesting things that happen there. And this is why, again, a lot of what I'm doing in within the spatial installation, I don't know if they're installations or these experiments or these works, they really explore a space in depth and make it possible that you can change your position. It's maybe not much going on in terms of like linear narration, although there is something happening. There is a compositional aspect to like composed in time, but it's mostly composed in depth. And so wherever you are and how much time you spend there, similar to, let's say, Lamont Young's Dream House or works by Mayana Maché, and you would be able to like behave also towards the space, and your body movement is modulating and changing stuff, but also like your position within that space where these things happen is very important. So shrinking all that into like a microsecond, this is what this instrument is about.
Okay. We are running electronic instruments usually into other electronic circuits and other instruments. For this, would it make more sense to play this into a speaker and then into a space even?
Yeah.
This is how Peter showed
Yeah.
it to me the first time I came
How?
to the workshop at Patchpoint. He already had like one of the Genelag that he was using to amplify what the click synth was doing, and he had turned it backwards towards the wall
because
under
I
the
always
staircase.
have it turned backwards anyway
Oh,
because I
amazing.
need to get at the volume knob on
Okay,
it.
because
But
the
it's-
volume knob is on the back of the Genex. Yeah.
But it's actually in that position it does, and which is a lovely
Beautiful.
position. It points into the concrete bunker under the stairs, and so you just all you hear is
The resin.
flashback. Yeah.
Okay.
When I got in,
Slap
I was really so happy. I can't express it. Like I was just like, he just turned this speaker around. This is I don't know. I was so excited, and another reference that Peter had, I think already during that first phone call with Darren, he was like, I've just been to a church with my kids, and I've just spent, I don't know, I just spent time there listening to the room and how that instrument actually is in dialogue with the room, and so I hit a nerve there as well because you were really into like exploring a room through.
Yeah, the church,
sound.
especially, it's just like a window cracks, like in a quiet church. Yeah, you hear that.
And another question, follow up to the speaker: is there plans to like develop also the speaker? Because this is becoming a product now, right?
The speaker, since it's more part of like our, let's say, explorations, the dynamische akustische Forschung, dynamic acoustic research, which used to be a class that I taught at the Academy of Fine Arts in Nuremberg, and it's now Sound Collective, and the exchange which I have with Michael and Michael Ackstaller, who built the prototype of the speaker, actually based on some ideas and some things we learned from a company called Holoplot, which is also based in Berlin, building wavefield synthesis systems. But this is not something that we would want to like make a product or a series, because we always build them actually according to a new situation.
Yeah,
And-
because you built them for the room and for the space.
Yes,
Actually.
and,
Okay.
and that dialogue, I think, to have that synth, and also it sounds amazing. I use it also through a PA system. I've
Okay.
started using it like in sets with like people I improvise with.
Okay.
And it's so punchy, and it has really bottom end. I've used it also in conjunction with my laptop, which is my main instrument, and that thing really cut through very strongly.
And that's always an interesting mix. Like when you mix the digital with the analog, sometimes I find that the analog will on a big PA, it just has more.
Yeah.
It just has more. I played the Acousmonium in Milan recently, and I thought, oh, cool! I've got 50 speakers to do stuff with, and I just want to have some more voices because I was playing the Zidrax organus and I was playing the Coco Quantos, but then I added on the iPad that I had a bunch of like pure generators, pure sine generators. And I thought, okay, just put these in there, put these in the space and see, excite different parts. And I did that. Oh, that sounds good. But then I played the Zidrax, which of course it's triangle waves. It's a different kind of waves. But it was like, okay, turned them all off. I was like, no, just going with that.
Turn the sine waves off.
Sine
and
waves
go
off
for
and
it,
just go with the analog direct. If you get a big space, you can really feel it. But it's another thing if I ran those again through the Coco Quantos, I don't know whether would that already like changes it a bit to more. But straight from the interface, pure sines weren't as nice as like the analog tones I found. So mixing these, it can be difficult.
Well, there's irony. More and more in my life, I always see irony, and I try to enjoy it. I was going to say application-wise, you of course could use Jan's awesome speakers. You could use just a Genelec with cut the bass with kind of the bass roll off thing.
Yeah.
And that would work to excite a concrete bunker. But I mean, there's also an interesting thing that happened in the aughts, which was called clicks and cuts music, which is based on digital artifacts.
Yeah.
And so the irony here is that you're talking about analog sounds being somehow punchier than digital sounds, and this actual analog sound is trying to, in one of its applications would be imitating a digital artifact sound, the click sound when you cut tracks. So it's an interesting play there.
Yeah, but those are textually very different from like the clicks and cuts, which is
Right.
like the zero. What happens when you don't cut properly at the zero of a waveform?
Yeah.
You get this click, and that became like the, I think Dietrich Dietrichson called it the fetish of the genre.
Yeah.
The one thing that like, okay, that's how it's defined.
It's interesting because that was never in the first place, since I'm making music for a very long time now, and I know how we had all these digital tools at hand at some point, like affordable and available through computers and laptops and stuff. And what happened all the time is like you would change the DC offset, and you would always like do things which were not supposed to happen,
exactly.
but you could still somehow record that stuff, and you had like weird phase shifts, and then you would go into like granular.
DC offset when your speaker is just like pushed out, and you're like, what's happening?
Yeah, and
that
it's beautiful.
changes
It's the
the sound.
choreo.
Yeah.
It's the dance of like the invisible sound wave somehow, and you're like, but then of course, like once this, like more people start using this or see, oh, we can do that, or others get away with it. Let's incorporate that in our music, and then journalists come and try to find a name for it. And
Clicks and cuts.
yeah,
Yeah, but
or
Adam
even
Szczepanski
glitch.
was very much writing about like.
And
clicks and
Szczepanski
cuts.
was somebody who, like, he ran this label Mille Plateau, which I don't know if still exists, but Achim is still
Re-exists
around.
now.
And he was really into conceptualizing, and also from a political point of view, conceptualizing, let's say, the means of production, tools in the hands of like producers, which would really go full extreme. But he had a different idea, strategy, and tactic behind these things. If I may say, I don't know if that's a good term, but at least for Mouse on Mars, Microstoria, the group or duo that I had with Markus Popp from Oval and a few others at that time, which weren't even musicians, people from the A-Musik context. We had no interest in producing glitch or clicks and cuts music. We were just interested in really testing the limits of how far could we take this, and also the limits which were there. They weren't really given. It wasn't really that, like, if you had a software like Alchemy or, I don't know, Peak, or like all these things were suddenly available, you weren't really told what to do with these things. It was really based on like, go figure out and see how you can connect this with this. Similar to when we started out with Mouse on Mars, and we were feeding our synthesizers through guitar pedals or through amps and miking this up again and these kind of things. And then people told us, look, if you want to do techno, keep your signal straight, because that sound is just like, it just sounds bad. It sounds crunchy and nasty. If you want to be an indie band, you should really play the guitar through your pedal. That's the sound we like, but don't use synthesizers, and please stay away from bass drums. And 303 is absolutely, has nothing to do with like the indie music that we like. And academic people were like, okay, if you cannot score it, we don't know what to do with it. So it might have been an abstract, whatever you call it, sound world or suggestion of like, that's how far we might want to go with our listening and following a sound by following it, listening to it. It's not really what we want, because we need a score with it, and we need to discuss that because it's a discourse. And if you want to be part of the discourse, you have to like find.
You have to play by the rules, basically.
Yeah,
Or the basically what the format. Each like genre, each like has conventions. Every form of music has conventions.
100%. What was crazy is that in electroacoustic music, this is really becoming a total, I don't know, we're really like sprenging the format. But in electroacoustic music, the whole idea was that the material that you could record would be also, that would lead the composition. You would have to follow along the material. And even if there were people like inventing scores, it was never about having a score beforehand. You might have a score afterwards, so you could explain what you did or make it possible for others to re-perform this.
Well, it's definitely how I work when I make circuits. I just start with the materials that I have and then write the score, the schematic.
Yes,
later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's also interesting, schematic versus score. I'm 100% into schematics, and I'm 100% into like knowledge, like translation, giving access, open source if it makes sense, or at least like inviting people to participate, enjoy, understand, break, open the synthesizer, circuit bend, figure out like, oh, this is how this looks like, this is what that does when you touch it or when you connect it, or like, the whole Stime dogma was like, give the tools into the hands of the musicians. Each musician should be able to build their own instrument, their own interface, get access to the method of synthesis or sound production, whatever it is, use a TV set and play that if they want to. And so that is kind of a thing that somehow originated in electroacoustic music and post-war experimental music, and through punk even got the whole DIY idea got a total boost again. And then eventually you're back at like, okay, which genre does this belong to? Is this glitch? Then it's not part of like the new music or
well, yeah, when I brought up clicks and cuts, I meant as a thing, as an artifact of the past. Not to diss Mille Plateau. In fact, 20 years ago, I sent Mille Plateau a proposal to make a Delusion synthesizer, which they didn't respond because it wasn't a recording either. But that's when I decided that I actually would stop. I wouldn't make recordings as an artist. I would make synthesizers as an artist.
I think it's beautiful. A bit like this kind of Tristan Parridge idea that you would have the instrument and the instrument is also the record. And I mean, it's not much you can really perform it yourself when you get it, but I like all these things. I think they're beautiful and I think absolutely necessary.
Well, yeah, my goal is to make a recording that's an instrument that people have many things they can do with. That's always my goal, is that the recording is as open as possible.
I mean, I think it is a whole like thought product, like it's a mind product, and it's like it's kind of like has this tiny trigger that maybe I came and approached you or through Darren, but all that could or you could see that as a process of synthesis. You have a stupid little idea, and then you kind of channel it through something that's able to amplify or distribute or like make audible, and then it's being perceived by somebody like Peter, and then it like turns into like a concept, or actually in the end it's like it becomes schematic, and that is because there's a process of translation, there's a process of like this idea isn't just stuck in somebody's brain. This person for some reason made it possible to either like talk about it, translate it into language, or translate it into a sound, and any sound you would put out in the world is always also a text. Somebody reads that sound and goes like, wow, this makes me think of this, or this makes me do that. So we all of us, we communicate, and I think it's beautiful that sometimes you also have an object, and you can say this is a thought.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's an inspiring thought. Yeah. Like with that idea, like the orchestra in a millisecond. I mean, that's inspiring to basically every musician. And now I'm very curious about, because how do you achieve that orchestra in a millisecond?
Well, when Jan gave me the idea, I set about figuring out how I would distribute my Norton amplifiers, which, as I said, is my 10-year project, working with only the 3900. And so I decided, because it's a square instrument, I'll have 4 of them. So that's 16 op amps. So I need to have 2 oscillators. So that's 4 sections. I need to have 2 swoops. So that's 4 sections. So I've used up 8, and I have 8 left. Well, I need a VCA, I need another VCA, and I need, for my modulations, I want to make my modulations, again, misinterpreted or have kinks in them. So you use to put a ring mod in there. So that was a ring mod. Oh, each oscillator would ring mod by the other oscillator, and then each swoop would ring mod by the other swoop. By the way, you see all
cross-modulating.
Yeah, they're cross-modulating.
I mean, this idea of cross-modulating is like also in the Coco Quantos, for example, in the Quantosi section.
Yeah, everything's woven together.
Yeah, exactly.
And in fact, this prototype had a lot of wires representing all the weavings.
Mm-hmm.
And all these transistors are beautiful. I love how these op-amps love to use transistors, because that's where the power comes from in analog synths. Look at the schematic.
Okay.
So also, by the way, I'm working on this new chip. I'm also working on a new way to schematic that's like a cursive form. I draw the amplifiers are like these triangular symbols, and they have a curly Q for positive feedback and lack a curly Q for negative feedback. So there's actually no text on it. It's all just kind of this medieval cursive. And then all the transistors, because there's a lot of transistors if you want to make this wide range. And there are all these differential pairs, and there's these curly Qs. I put a dot in one for PNP, and no dot. And so now I can see what actually, I had 12, and I need to get to, I have a buffer for the, yes, you have the click signal that you're putting in there. You have to really clean that. So I had to clean up. There's 2 more, cleaning up the impulse. And then I also invert the Ringlers too, so that everything can go in both directions. You know, you can have a long decay, a long attack, but you can also have a ring mod pulling things up, but a ring mod pulling things down. So you can have one oscillator modulated to go upwards and one modulated to go downwards. So you're creating
a big spectrum basically for
right.
that. And you're also making like so one thing goes up, one thing goes down, like you would do in orchestra where the voices move like fishes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, yeah, and the player, the user has the choice of to have everything go up, you know, everything in sync or everything in countersync. Yeah. There were 2 things that you said. One was using the clicker, the military clicker. And the other one was using your software, your Super Collider software that you called Pulse Trains. Mm-hmm. So there was actually an ambiguity there between the simple use of clicks and then
Pulse Trains.
The entrainment. So that was something I've always been working on, is having an instrument have 2 ranges or more than 2 ranges. One for really, of course, your knobs should have as much, 8 to 10 octaves already, but then adding even more range, like multiplying by 1,000 or something, so that you take a sound that was just a click and make it into a pulse train itself. So that's what the musical mode is supposed to be. If I have 2 clicks, and then I put it into musical mode. It switched to capacitors now, and now I can, if I take it down and take the frequency down, I have pulse trains. The sound of a crawfish brain experiment, when you touch it, it puts out a pulse train. It goes,
Okay.
When you touch a crawfish brain
Yeah.
and you have an electrode, it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
All these little...
that's a neuronal.
Yeah.
Neuronal. In fact, I don't think there's anywhere in our brains where we have actual frequencies or sine waves.
Yeah.
It's all pulses in our brains. Yeah.
Could be the crawfish. Could also be
Oh, yeah. I used to make up, mushroom names. And so I've been figuring out, what is the progress of it? Do I keep on making psychedelic names for everything? And I've figured out like a metaphysics of naming is that you start out, like maybe say in your 20s, you should create new concepts and new namings. That is always an important part of a person's life. But also I think moving forward, what I've experienced, I want to create normal names at the moment.
Okay.
So the Coco Quantus will become Cafe Quantum. Those are 2 normal words, Cafe Quantum.
This sounds like from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, it's a
at
90s
least.
name.
So it's not normal, but it's not more normal than Coco Quantum.
Yeah.
Cafe Quantum.
Well, names using pre-existing materials.
Isn't it? It sounds a bit related to your kiosk. That you
Yeah,
had at some
it's
point.
something with pre-existing materials. But then the final state, if I get to be old enough, would be, again, going back to weird names, but they're jokes. They're like funny. So it synthesizes the 2 previous ones where it's like getting away from weird names, and they're still kind of funny, but then they're actually weird names and they're funny. So but that'll be in the future.
Okay, to get the puns in.
I can 100% relate to this. 100%. You make, it's like,
It's for
youth
bands
culture.
too. Yeah,
Absolutely.
for music
And
making too.
100%. I mean, with Mouse and Mouse, we always made up stuff, and I think the reason titles are a bit more. You want to
sober.
You start communicating a bit more. Like you know you've created your language and your whatever esoteric world, and it's quite stable. And then at some point you're interested in like communicating with other worlds, and you realize language is actually a good tool to communicate with these networks.
Yeah. When you're young and you make up namings, and languages, and you said your world is stable at a certain point. You have this like circus of names.
Yeah, you have confidence.
And that's another reason why to not make up anymore, because you want to like respect that world that you created and actually kind of bring it along with you. And I like to reuse terms, like, but not make up new ones. And I think that's a great advice for young people: is don't be afraid of making up new things and names, and try to create that world, because that's something you can take with you.
This is like a custom-built version that Peter came up with that has a sequencer attached to the click synth.
So yeah, it's the Peterlin product. So yeah, this will also be a product too.
The combination.
They're obviously part of this new modular I'm working on. It's
And with a
like
combined
pocket-sized
output?
modular. I don't know yet. I think the separate outputs, I don't know yet. Do you think the combined is better? Because you can't mix them if they're combined.
Maybe at a mixer? I don't know, because you need like, there was already like 4 channels that you need to plug into somewhere.
Well, it's 3 channels.
Oh, because
this is mono.
Mono, okay.
This is stereo.
It's footwork.
One thing that's really important for most of all my instruments, but especially this one, is the noise floor. It has a really good noise floor. It's a silent floor. A silent floor.
Yeah?
Okay.
And then
Yeah,
there's the boop.
Yeah, at the end of each knob is going to be the lowest frequencies. In the middle is going to be the highest frequencies. This is a basic four patch cable patch where the reds of the Peterlin are triggering the clicks, and then also the oranges of the Peterlin, which are slope forms, are modulating the envelope of each click. So some of the clicks are just the proper grain size, and some of them are stretched out
Now they're like
by
shoo,
the modulate. Yeah,
like this. Yeah.
but that shoo is in the tiny click itself, so we're revealing what's in the
okay.
tiny click. You know, and that's the basic way to play it. Would be to, if you're playing it, like if you want to figure out what sound, so I don't know what's in that, right?
Yeah.
So I stretch out the envelope and I listen
you
to
know.
it,
Okay.
and then I bring it in. So
You're
that-
time compressing.
Yeah.
Basically. Time stretching and time compressing.
Yeah.
And then again, space extension.
Okay.
Time compression and space extension. That's the dialogue.
Beautiful.
And here our discussion ended, and we had made plans to go out to a church and play the clicker there, exploring the resonances, but too many timing difficulties. So Peter and Jan went to a gallery space, and this is the film that they brought back.
We met at the bunker. This is the test rig. Go in the gallery door and call the friend. Will you try upstairs? I'll sit in the concrete room when you walk up to the door.
As you could hear in that film, when used to excite buildings, spaces, Janowitz is wonderful. There is so much that echoes back. It also works beautiful as a dual percussion voice inside a track. Though if you open up the full spectrum, it can fill up a mix very fast. So you need to be kind of minimal about it. It's a banana synthesizer, so it interfaces well with the Surge and the whole Ciat-Lonbarde range, but not so well, with something like the Korg SQ1. It works really well with it, but you need some of these adapter cables. I'm using the Banana brand one that Darren makes, and they work fine. And I even realized that you could use one of those cables for the ground. So they fit inside the cable on the SQ1. So that's a cool tip if you want to use your SQ1 with the Banana gear. Just plug this in gently, like to one of the jacks that you're not using. Since this is a very different video to those I usually make, let me know in the comments what you thought of it. And that's it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye.